Let us pray. Our Divine Father, as we conclude for this week our work in this assembly, we renew our thanks and ask that we may continue our work under your guidance on behalf of all the people of this province. Amen.
Introduction of visitors.
Mr. Speaker, in your gallery today visiting the legislature is His Excellency U Ba Twin, the Burmese ambassador to Canada, making a familiarization tour, and he's accompanied by his third secretary, Tan Tun. I'd ask our distinguished visitors to rise and receive the welcome of the Assembly.
Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce a bill, Bill number 16, being the Special Waste Management Corporation Amendment Act 1986. The bill will change some of the current responsibilities of the Chairman of the Alberta Special Waste Management Corporation.
The Minister of the Environment has moved first reading of Bill number 16, Special Waste Management Corporation Amendment Act 1986. Does the Assembly agree to the motion for first reading? Opposed? So ordered.
A bill being Special Waste Management Corporation Amendment Act 1986, introduced by Honourable Mr. Kowalski, is now read a first time.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce Bill number 10, the Department of Technology, Research and Telecommunications Act. This being a money bill, Her Honour the Honourable the Lieutenant Governor, having been informed of the contents of this bill, recommends the same to the Assembly. Mr. Speaker, this bill establishes the Department of Technology, Research and Telecommunications.
The Minister of Technology, Research and Telecommunications has moved first reading of Bill number 10, the Department of Technology, Research and Telecommunications Act. Does the Assembly agree to the motion for first reading? Opposed, if any? Carried.
A bill being Department of Technology, Research and Telecommunications Act, introduced by Honourable Mr. Young, is now read a first time.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce private bill number 1, Alberta Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Canada Act. Mr. Speaker, the purpose of this bill is to incorporate the Alberta Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Canada and to provide for its constitution.
The Honourable Member for Little Bow has moved first reading of Private Bill 1, the Alberta Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Canada Act. Does the Assembly agree to the motion for first reading? Opposed? Carried.
A bill being Alberta Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Canada Act, introduced by Honourable Member Mr. Speaker, is now read a first time.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Bill PR2, Northwest Bible College Act. Mr. Speaker, the purpose of this bill is to incorporate the college and to empower it to grant degrees in divinity.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Kingsway has moved first reading of Bill PR2, Northwest Bible College Act. Does the Assembly agree to the motion for first reading? Opposed, if any? So ordered.
A bill being Northwest Bible College Act, introduced by Honourable Member Mr. McEachern, is now read a first time.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Bill PR3, the Oxford Trust Company Act. Mr. Speaker, the purpose of this bill is to incorporate a trust company. The bill follows the form specified in the regulations to the Trust Companies Act.
The honourable member for Calgary-McCall has moved first reading of Bill PR3, Oxford Trust Company Limited Act. Does the Assembly agree to the motion for first reading? Opposed, if any? Carried.
A bill being Oxford Trust Company Limited Act, introduced by Honourable Member Mr. Nelson, is now read a first time.
Mr. Speaker, I have another PR, and I beg leave to introduce Bill PR6, the Timothy Z. Marshall Bar Admission Act. Mr. Speaker, the purpose of this bill is to provide for the admission of Timothy Z. Marshall, who is a British subject, to the Alberta Bar so that he may practice in Bermuda. The Attorney General of Bermuda has requested support of this bill.
The honourable member for Calgary-McCall has moved first reading of Bill PR6, Timothy Z. Marshall Bar Admission Act. Does the Assembly agree to the motion for first reading? Opposed, if any? Carried.
A bill being Timothy Z. Marshall Bar Admission Act, introduced by Honourable Member Mr. Nelson, is now read a first time.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Bill PR4, the Canada Olympic Park Property Tax Exemption Act. The purpose of this bill is to exempt from municipal taxation the ski jumps and luge and bobsled runs constructed at the Canada Olympic Park. The petition is presented by the Municipal District of Rocky View, number 44, the taxing authority.
The honourable member for Banff Cochrane has moved first reading of Bill PR4, Canada Olympic Park Property Tax Exemption Act. Does the Assembly agree to the motion for first reading? Opposed, if any? So ordered.
A bill being Canada Olympic Park Property Tax Exemption Act, introduced by Honourable Member Mr. Stevens, is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to table a reply to question 139.
Introduction of special guests.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to introduce to you and through you 4 distinguished guests from my constituency. First, the Mayor of the town of Fairview, Jim Reynolds. Secondly, Karen Paul and Tom Baldwin from the Mackenzie Regional Planning Commission, and Ian McDonald, a farmer in our area and past chairman of the Board of Governors of the Fairview College. I ask them to rise now and receive the applause from this assembly.
Honourable members, I draw your attention to the Speaker's gallery to introduce three persons seated there. I'd ask that they rise as I mention their names. First, Mr. Donald Salmon, the Auditor General of the province of Alberta. Mr. Larry Dennis, the Auditor for Bermuda, and also one who has served the province with distinction, Mr. Douglas Rogers, who was Provincial Auditor from 1973 to 1978, and Auditor General from 1978 to 1986.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct the first question to the Minister responsible for Personnel Administration and ask, first of all, if he is aware if there are any special guidelines for employees of the Social Services Department over and above the General Code of Conduct for provincial employees, And specifically, I'm wondering if he's aware of this and if he recognizes that they significantly restrict the right to freedom of association.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not aware of any specifics of that nature. They have not been brought to my attention.
Well, supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to file 4 copies because they are around, and they are from the Social Services Department from the Deputy Minister. Now, Mr. Speaker, the guidelines specifically prohibit employee membership in associations or community groups if that membership conflicts with the philosophy of the department. And they also state that no employee may publicly criticize departmental policy. My question is, do you want to ask it? Go ahead. My question is, will the minister be asking that these guidelines be withdrawn given their obvious conflict with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms?
Mr. Speaker, until I've read them very thoroughly and see whether they are indeed reasonable or not, I'm not prepared to make that commitment.
Well, supplementary, maybe the courts will, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, it's one thing to prevent conflicts of interest and insubordination, but it's quite another to prevent departmental clerical workers or truck drivers from attending political meetings on their off hours. My question to the minister is this: what steps will the minister be taking to ensure that guidelines for personnel in each department are consistent and do not violate basic human rights?
I've already said, Mr. Speaker, I'm not prepared to give a commitment that I will have these rescinded until I've read them very carefully and studied them. Obviously, this government believes in the freedom of people to do reasonable things, but like most employers, they expect some restrictions, reasonable restrictions on what people may do if it affects their work or affects the function of the department that they work for.
Well, supplementary question in a more general vein, maybe the minister can answer this question, because in a landmark ruling in Nova Scotia, the Nova Scotia Supreme Court struck down a provincial law prohibiting government employees from engaging in partisan activity. My question to the minister is, in view of this, will the minister be recommending changes to the overall code of conduct and ethics so as to ensure that it complies with the Charter?
Mr. Speaker, as is well known, this government has a good record of being reasonable in its relations with its employees, and that principle will continue. Matters such as the Code of Conduct are under ongoing review any time that anything is brought up from any other province, and we will, of course, make sure that our treatment of our employees continues to be, as it has been in the past, reasonable, and it will be within the Charter.
Member for Little Bow.
To the Premier relative to this question in a broader sense, could the Premier indicate, since the inception of the Charter of Rights, whether the Government of Alberta has a person or persons in place to review the consistency of government practices, government legislation, and various actions to see that they are in accord with that Charter?
Mr. Speaker, that's a question that I would like to delve into in some detail and report back to the honourable member. Since the inception of the Charter of Rights, there has been some period of time when I haven't been here, but I would like to see what happened during that period of time and report back.
Member for Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Labour, will he undertake to report to the House if any personnel have been disciplined under these regulations?
Mr. Speaker, that's a difficult commitment to make as it involves individuals, and I don't think that the treatment of individuals should necessarily be brought back to the House. It would depend upon the circumstances.
Agreed. Main question, Leader of the Opposition.
I don't know if this is the main one or the other one, but Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct this question to the Premier. During Executive Council estimates last night, the Premier admitted, and I quote, "It's getting dangerously late to still be trying to establish a base for an oil policy and program. The fact that lease sales are at their lowest level since 1977 confirms that it is dangerously late." My question to the Premier is this: has the Premier determined when it will be too late, And has he got some plan to try and miss that deadline?
Well, Mr. Speaker, obviously it's a judgment, and judgments are matters that you make as time goes on. As I tried to explain last night to the honourable member, there are a variety of factors involved in that judgment, working with the industry, working with the federal government, watching the way the energy matters develop. It will just be something that we'll have to do from day to day in making that decision.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. When the Premier says it's dangerously late, it would seem to us that there should be some action occurring. But to go into the sales itself, the number of sales are at their lowest level in 9 years, and the average price per hectare is at the lowest rate since 1977. Has the Premier asked for an assessment of the Treasurer's revenue projections given this slump, and is the government doing any sort of rewrite now of the budget figures?
Mr. Speaker, sales for a short period of time, and we're only very shortly into our current fiscal year, do not indicate the full fiscal year, nor would the, as indicated yesterday, nor would the world price, given any particular price per day necessary, impact on the full budget of the government. It's quite possible that there could be a turnaround both in sales and in the price of oil and gas between now and next April of '87, which is the fiscal year. However, Mr. Speaker, such things as low sales are in the budget. That is in the figuring in the budget, in the provincial treasurer's estimate of what the deficit would be. He was counting on lower sales, and the sales are lower. But I don't think it requires now a new budget estimate.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. It seems to be that the action is wishful thinking from the government. But let me direct this question to the Minister of Energy. The Minister of Energy has said that take-up has been slow on his incentive packages because people must do the work first and then apply. But these lease sales indicate that there's not much work going on. My question to the Minister, does the Minister then have other information to indicate that there is exploration activity happening despite the drop in lease sales?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I indicated yesterday the information that I have with respect to take-up on the incentive programs that have been announced since last April. And part of that information is, as the honourable member has indicated, that applications would be made after the contractors have been paid. Additional information, I indicated yesterday that there's been a large number of people who have indicated that they would be attending workshops in Calgary with respect to how to go about in applying for these particular programs, and more information on the qualifications for those programs, and some 400 to 500 people have indicated they would be attending those seminars. Also, I have been having ongoing discussions with people in the industry, and will do so again this afternoon over the weekend. And all this information indicates that we expect the developmental drilling program and the well servicing program to be taken up by the end of September, and that there will be further take-up on the exploration program and the geophysical program in the fall.
It's nice that we're having workshops and seminars, but I wish there was some indication that the minister's words were in fact going to come about. But it seems, Mr. Speaker, if exploration is not occurring, we will not be finding new supplies of oil, and so our reserves will be depleted. My question to the minister is simply this: can the minister assure the Assembly that the reserves are being replaced at a satisfactory rate at this time?
How can one possibly do that, Mr. Speaker?
Member for Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, what, if any, creative cost-cutting initiatives is the government employing to bring down the deficit, or are we just drifting and wishing?
Remember, that's completely off the topic. We're dealing with energy at this stage.
On the revenue. We're talking about revenue and deficit, Mr. Speaker. It's supplementary might have been off the topic. I'm trying to get it back on to the Premier. But I may repeat view of the rather doomsday scenario that's coming up. But what initiatives is the government employing to bring down the deficit, or are we just drifting and wishing and hoping?
Mr. Speaker, we aren't drifting, wishing, and hoping. Maybe the honourable member is. What we are doing, Mr. Speaker, is everything possible to run an efficient operation and yet deliver the services that the people of Alberta request and need. And it's interesting that we are right in the middle of our estimates. We've been going for hours and hours and hours, and I haven't heard the honourable member stand up one time and suggest one new idea. I mean, that is the process of the House. And in a few minutes we will be again in estimates, which is exactly the place, and it's the way this was developed over the years in legislatures and the parliamentary system, that all members can then participate. The government does its job and presents the budget, and then the members can participate. And as a matter of fact, what I have heard over the past number of days is not less dollars or less expenditures, rather recommendations from the opposition that there be many, many more dollars spent and income taxes cut, and that therefore the deficit would be only bigger if we followed their suggestions.
Main question, Leader of the Liberal Party.
Yes, lots of. This is the question, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Agriculture. On August the 1st, 86 wheat prices are estimated to be dropping $160 or $130 a ton, about 80 cents a bushel. And this drop in prices will cost the average farmer possibly $10,000 in income, larger farmers more. Now, what program or plans have the government, or does the government have, to help Alberta farmers to overcome this drop in grain prices?
Mr. Speaker, this gives me an opportunity to underscore again for the honourable member from Westlock Sturgeon the number of excellent programs we do have in existence in the province of Alberta, starting with our feed grain market adjustment program, the reduction in farm fuel costs, and one can go on for quite some period of time, but rather than abuse the time of the chamber, let me indicate to the honourable member that from the tone of his questions, it would appear that he should run for the by-election in Pembina so that he might have the opportunity to serve in the federal House, because all his questions are of a federal nature.
No. Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, I can understand his trying to shift blame onto the federal government because he's had nobody answer the phone calls, but supplementary is this is deficiency payments. I'd like to direct it to the Premier. Is he still reluctant to support a $1 billion federal fund deficiency payments to help prairie farmers to compete in the export markets?
Mr. Speaker, that was a matter that was dealt with and recommended from the Western Premiers Conference to the federal government.
Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, point was he didn't want to support it. Now, let's go back to the Premier again with the second supplementary, a question of philosophy of acreage payments. What is the government's position regarding acreage payments to Alberta farmers in light of the Premier's frequent speeches, talks on free market ideology?
Boy, they got to get someone new writing those questions for you, Nick. We did, Mr. Speaker, as four Western premiers suggest the large deficiency payment from the federal government to assist farmers. So that's opposite to what the honourable member suggested. In terms of acreage payments, I guess, Mr. Speaker, it's certainly always one option that must be considered when you're trying to help farmers in difficult times. But it, of course, is a heavy drain on any government's budget, and of course we know the problems that the federal government has. Nevertheless, our government feels, Mr. Speaker, that our farmers do need help, and while we can't control their selling prices, we have put our emphasis on their input costs because they sell in world markets and we're unable to control those prices, but we do put the emphasis on the input costs, and therefore we have provided some $135 million in support of lowering their energy costs, because that's natural to this province. This is the energy province, and they therefore get a 64 cents a gallon rebate on their energy costs. That's the largest support in energy costs in Canada. We also support them on their input costs by reducing the cost of fertilizer to them, to remove the impact of royalties and taxes on the fertilizer that goes into the production of fertilizer. Thirdly, we assist them with their insurance and their stabilization program to give them low input costs on stabilization and insurance. And fourthly, we are now providing them with the fixed rate long-term cost of money at 9%, perhaps lower if we can. And therefore, in these four essential ways, Mr. Speaker, we have lowered the input cost to our farmers, giving them the lowest input cost in Canada.
Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, those are wonderful answers to somebody else's questions, I guess. I haven't heard anything on acreage payments. But in the light of the economic disaster facing Alberta grain farmers, and in light of the fact that the Saskatchewan government is pushing for $10 an acre acreage payments, is the government prepared to lobby the federal government to increase last year's $5.35 an acre acreage payment to something much higher than that?
Mr. Speaker, it is early to know whether that would be necessary because, as I've said, we have made a dramatic impact on input costs, and it appears that farmers in Alberta may be entering into a very exceptional crop year, albeit some problems in the north with lack of rain. However, if there are additional measures that are necessary, we will certainly assess them. The one the member for Westlock Sturgeon has just suggested is one option, and we will give it consideration.
Member for Little Bow. Minister of Agriculture, and with regards to the commitment the minister made in the legislature the other day to extend the date of delivery for quotas. Could the minister indicate whether the action has been taken with regards to that statement at this point, and have inquiries been made by farmers for that extension? Because of the elevators.
Mr. Speaker, in response to the honourable member from Little Bow, let me indicate to him my commitment at that time was not to extend it because it doesn't fall under our jurisdiction, but make representations to the appropriate federal minister who is responsible. We have made those representations. We also received the assurance from the Canadian Wheat Board at that time that in the event that a farmer was facing difficulty in meeting his delivery time, if he would contact the Canadian Wheat Board, they would be happy to extend the time period in which he could deliver it.
Member for Vegreville.
Supplementary to the Honourable Minister of Agriculture, Mr. Speaker, will the minister, recognizing the historic reluctance of the federal government to do much to aid the Western grain industry, will you outline, other than input cost reduction programs, what contingency plans you have in place to deal with this dramatic drop in grain producers' income in the absence of meaningful federal action?
Mr. Speaker, as the honourable member for Bakerville should know, just recently the United States and the European Economic Community did reach an agreement whereby they have set aside their differences for a period of time so that there would not be this drastic impact on the grain producer. We're delighted that they have taken that action. In addition, our federal minister, the minister responsible for the Canadian Wheat Board, Mr. Mayer, has gathered together the major grain producers of the world to hopefully reach some type of a consensus whereby we will not have the United States and the economic community of Europe fighting, because these are external forces which have a direct bearing on the grain producer in Canada, and we're hopeful that some resolution will be reached in that area.
Member, Leader of the Representative Party, followed by the member for Wainwright.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Environment, and in light of the discovery of the old toxic waste dump at Dow Chemical here at Fort Saskatchewan, can the Environment Minister indicate whether the province of Alberta has an inventory or a registry of old dumping sites relative to various kinds of industries that could produce toxic waste?
Mr. Speaker, an inventory has been worked on for the last several years, but in terms of the briefings that I've had with respect to this matter, I'm not convinced that we are as vigilant as we need to be in that particular area, and that's one of the agenda items that I've addressed for myself for the remaining part of 1986, to see what we have to do to ensure that we have a complete inventory of all sites in the past.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to the Minister of Environment. I appreciate that. In terms of the inventorization that will take place, will it be the intent of the Minister to put in place a field team that would do that rather quickly and bring the information back to the Minister?
That would be part of it, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to the Minister. Would the Ministry be prepared, or would it be the intent of the Minister to bring legislation into the Assembly, such as a bill that's going to be introduced by my colleague, whereby a registry of all toxic wastes by various companies, various processors, would be compulsory in the province of Alberta from this date forward, or as well registering any type of old dumps that may be in place?
I tend to think, Mr. Speaker, that under the new legislation and the mandate of the Alberta Special Waste Management Corporation, the first part of the question will be covered. The second part is the one that troubles me, is what's happened in the past, so that we can get a complete inventory of these materials that have been stored here, there, and everywhere in the province of Alberta over past decades. I feel rather comfortable that from this day forward, at least with the mandate that we have for the Alberta Special Waste Management Corporation and the designation and the registration of chemicals, insecticides, pesticides, and other materials in Alberta, that we're being quite vigilant about that. It's this past historic material that bothers me.
Speaker, final supplementary, and with regards to the actual find at Dow Chemical, has the Minister given directions to staff or other personnel to assure us that all wastes will be found and dealt with properly?
Absolutely, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure if the members of the Assembly would like a little additional information with respect to that, but they should be very, very much assured that the Minister of the Environment has directed absolute total vigilance with respect to this matter. We were first informed that on June 27, 1986, that 3 crushed barrels were uncovered, along with some residual tarry odorous substances. Work was stopped. Further investigation, including drilling on the site, was conducted. Massive amounts of barrels, crushed barrels, were uncovered between July 3 and July 8, some 1,022 of them, essentially crushed barrels. Officials of Alberta Environment have been on the scene on a day-to-day basis, and we are conducting sophisticated tests to determine what type of chemical may have been contained in the barrels that were crushed. As well, the materials have all been unearthed. They've been covered, and pending the test results, will be disposed of in a new waste disposal site that Dow Chemical currently has under contract. That will include liners in it and leachate materials attached to it.
Supplementary, member for West Loch Sturgeon.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Environment. talking about cleaning up sites, waste sites. Is he prepared to give a house cost of cleaning up the kinetic energy site up just south of town here?
Mr. Speaker, I would have been delighted to have had an opportunity to have done that in Wednesday past of this week. Unfortunately, didn't have an opportunity to get to that particular matter, but undoubtedly that in ensuing weeks and months of this session we'll have an opportunity to get involved in that matter in considerable detail.
Member for Edmonton Glengarry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the minister guarantee that at long last the Environment Department will bring forth a comprehensive policy that will govern the conditions of reclamation of industrial sites of the future, which are also of concern, and especially in the area where it would require guarantees and deposits of companies to ensure that they can clean up?
That currently is underway, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member was in the House Wednesday last when I identified to all members what the three basic objectives were of the Alberta Special Waste Management Corporation, and a review of the Hansard of Wednesday last will clearly indicate that I indicated that the legislation that had been written to govern the Alberta Special Waste Management Corporation contained three major objectives, and the review of Hansard of Wednesday last, if they wanted to point out objective number 3, part of the legislation will clearly cover that matter.
Member for Wainwright, followed by the member for Edmonton Belmont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Economic Development Minister, concerning the construction of our Provost Provincial Building, why does an Alberta project contract a gravel supplier and trucker from Saskatchewan when Alberta suppliers are available, especially when the same opportunity to compete on equal footing in Saskatchewan is not available to our Alberta suppliers?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not familiar with the specifics of the contract, but within Alberta, we have policies that we adhere to with respect to the awarding of contracts. And the essence of the policy is that where all things are equal in terms of price and experience and the availability of Alberta manpower is assured, that the contracts are awarded to Alberta contractors. That is where all things are equal. Unfortunately, some provinces, most of the provinces, have procurement policies that provide provincial protection.
Supplementary then, how are we making sure that the Alberta firms are getting equal access to our major projects?
Mr. Speaker, when in the fall of 1984, when public forums were held on the white paper, one of the proposals contained in the white paper that was referred to earlier by the member for Little Bow was with respect to provincial preference. And as we held these public forums throughout the province, the citizens of Alberta, in participating in that discussion, indicated to the government that they did not want us to implement provincial preference policies. Instead, they wanted us to work very diligently toward reducing the barriers that exist with other provinces. As a result of that, my predecessor undertook that extensive effort to work with other provinces, and at an earlier meeting in June of this year of Ministers of Economic Development, all of the provinces agreed that they would not add any elements to their existing provincial preferences and would work towards reducing those preferences that presently exist. And that's been Alberta's desire, because the spirit and the intent of the Constitution is to allow for the free movement of goods and services across this country. And so we're pleased with the progress that was made in Belleville, and we'll continue that, and there'll be a follow-up meeting in the fall to determine the specific reductions and preferences that might take place.
Member for supplementary, Calgary Mountain View.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister, I'm wondering how the First Ministers or the Ministers of Economic Development will be monitoring these steps to ensure progress. That is, are we going to have a GATT round of talks within our own provincial governments here in Canada?
Mr. Speaker, a part of the process, and this was as a result of Alberta's initiative of working toward reducing these barriers interprovincially, was to have a committee of officials to work on it, and they are working on it, and the monitoring is continuing, and the work toward reducing these interprovincial barriers is going on, and the follow-up meeting, as I indicated, will occur this fall.
Supplemental to the Minister of Economic Development. The Minister has just indicated that provinces have agreed not to increase any barriers or therefore any preferential policies with respect to their provinces. Our province clearly isn't up to the advantages offered by other provinces to their various industries. Is the Minister trying to tell us that we have locked ourselves into a disadvantaged position relative to other provinces?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure the honourable member was listening to my response. We in Alberta believe in the spirit and the intent of the Canadian Constitution, and that is that there should be a free and even flow of goods and services and capital across this country. The people of Alberta agreed with that position, even though we suggested in our white paper that we might implement provincial procurement policies, and the people of Alberta said, no, don't do that. Make every effort to reduce the barriers that do exist. And I've just described to the House that under the initiative and the leadership of the province of Alberta, we're beginning the process of removing and eliminating those initiatives. It doesn't mean that if we're not successful, that at some future date, there may be reconsideration of the position of the Alberta government.
Member for Edmonton Belmont.
Mr. Speaker, my question is directed to the Minister of Manpower. While the number of unemployed Albertans has dropped from 137,000 in May to 131,000 in June, the number of unemployed Edmontonians has increased 3,000 to a total of 52,000 unemployed in this city. What explanation does the Minister have for unemployment in Edmonton rising to 12.6%?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I might say to the honourable member from Edmonton Belmont that I have a great deal of difficulty with the unemployment statistics myself. Those same statistics showed that the unemployment rate in Calgary was down by almost 0.5%. So I do not like to use Statistics Canada statistics. We know that there is an economic downturn. We do not accept these numbers as literal because of the sample size. I think that we have to be sensitive to the economy, and I think that it's important to be in touch. I think that if we happen to live on the moon and look at the statistics in Edmonton and Calgary, it wouldn't give us a feeling of what's going on. Excuse me. But I would say that in any case, Mr. Speaker, we are concerned about unemployment. We have, if the honourable members had read the budget, they will see that in the capital projects we're going to spend $2.8 billion, which will create 67,000 full-time jobs. And as the Premier has said a number of times, it's one of the biggest job creation programs in the history of this province, and I think it's indicative that we are sensitive to the unemployment rates in this province.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. Given that the unemployment rate has been and is consistently higher in the city of Edmonton than in the city of Calgary, is the Minister prepared to develop some specific programs that are aimed at reducing unemployment in the capital city?
Mr. Speaker, I think that it's important to look at the Statistics Canada numbers and not react to the literal numbers that are presented to us. The sample size for Alberta is 5,000 to 6,000 people, so that whether there's a fraction difference between Edmonton or Calgary, we are not going to react any differently to the unemployment rates from one city to the other, because I realize that there's unemployment in both cities. It's both in excess of 10%. And so we are going to be reacting the same way that we have since we've been in this assembly and since we've been debating the budget. And that is with affirmative job creation programs, training and retraining under the Department of Manpower. Last year, we reached out and touched some 460,000 people in the Department of Manpower. So in ways of consulting them on career choices, career changes, and job creation programs for the disadvantaged and the other underprivileged, for women and for natives. So I think that we're going to continue along that line. Let me assure you of that. But in closing, Mr. Speaker, to the question, I don't think that we are going to change our thrust from Edmonton to Calgary because, based on these rates, because these rates to me are deceptive.
Mr. Speaker, they're deceptive to me too, because too many people are left off, and those are the people whose UI benefits have expired. However, I'll change the direction to a different minister, and I'll ask the Minister of Municipal Affairs if there are any plans to meet with the City of Edmonton officials to examine the benefits of funding some of the major projects in the city, such as an immediate restart-up of the Genesee plant, ring road construction, and sewer works in Mill Woods, just to name a few.
Mr. Speaker, as the member would know, there are a number of capital projects that the city is proceeding with at the present time that relate to provincial funding of those projects. And the AMPO program provides an opportunity for the city to construct further capital works. And I think the level of activity at Genesee is the decision, of course, of the city, and they have been proceeding with that. As I understand it, the construction has not stopped there and is progressing. As to proposals like the ring road, those are always under consideration and negotiation with the city government.
Well, unemployment still continues to get higher in the city. What special new programs are being considered, either to be sponsored solely by the provincial government or on a cost-sharing basis with the City of Edmonton that would reduce the unemployment rate in this city? To the Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I believe I've substantially answered the question in my previous answer. The funding is very generous indeed for capital projects in all municipalities. And the provincial government has long been involved as partners with the municipalities in supporting those projects, whether it be transportation objectives or providing funding for capital works. I recognize there are other things that can be examined still, and those are current matters that the cities and either directly or through their associations do raise with the province, and we have discussions with them. Other departments, such as transportation and the
areas where we cooperate in infrastructure. Those projects are always there for discussion and for the development of plans which are being implemented over a period of years and which do indeed create much employment.
Member for Edmonton Gold Bar.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Manpower. The statistics may not reveal too much to you, but they're all too visible in the cities to the rest of us. The food bank demands, for instance. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister is, has the Minister not just waited for, but has the Minister initiated discussions with the mayors of the larger cities regarding the restructuring of AMPL or any other initiatives that you might take to create urban jobs this year?
Mr. Speaker, again, the member must understand that the full impact of our budget expenditures for 1986 obviously has not been felt because it hasn't been spent. And as I said, we are on a regular basis reviewing every program under not only this department but under other ministers. And I might say that we are right at this present time reviewing the youth unemployment, and we are going to be very shortly reacting in a positive way to the concern we have for youth employment in the major cities. So the answer to the question, Mr. Speaker, is yes, we are reviewing and we are reacting.
Final supplementary, the member for Clover Bar.
Speaker, to the Minister of Municipal Affairs, this has to do with LRT. The Minister was very generous in his contribution before the election. Can the Minister indicate now what discussions have been going on between the Minister and the City of Edmonton to expedite the LRT projects and to also create work by doing that expedition of the LRT project?
Mr. Speaker, I think I should be brought up to date on some of the developments there in this sense. I haven't scheduled a meeting with the mayor or the alderman in Ward 5 recently. I've talked to them all about the project, but what information seems to be public is that they are looking again at that whole proposal to go south. My commitment was that in the proper budget year, I would make a presentation to the Treasury Board. I think the member would agree with me that the city should at least leave Jasper Avenue and their construction process before we start funding the university farm.
Final supplementary on this issue, and of question period, member for Banff Cochrane.
Mr. Speaker, the rules that you have graciously given us permit me only one supplemental, but I would therefore like to direct this question to the Minister of Transportation and Utilities. In driving throughout Edmonton and Calgary, it's very difficult to drive right now with the construction. Could he give us an estimate of the amount of contributions from the province and the number of jobs that are expected this year in the city of Edmonton?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't have the total to standing in front of a microphone. Mr. Speaker, I don't have the exact figure in front of me for the amounts of monies that are allocated to the City of Edmonton just there. I had them the other night for my estimates, but I was listening to speeches. And probably what I could do is indicate, though, that we are in constant touch with the city officials in both Edmonton and Calgary and all of the other cities relative to anything that relates to transportation, and are working with them in relation to the project that was announced discussed just a little earlier, and that was the LRT project. My understanding right now is that the preliminary engineering is in progress relative to the government station to the University of Alberta station, and that we're awaiting some response from the city relative to the future direction of were you prepared to interrupt, or just are you babbling?
Time for question period has expired. Orders of the day.
Committee of Supply.
That Alberta gas not be sold below fair value, thereby rejecting the market. Now, will the Premier tell the House and those companies which are currently in the midst of negotiating gas contracts just what he considers to be a fair market value of natural gas and the principles that he would apply in determining that fair value?
Mr. Speaker, natural gas is an extremely important resource to the people of Alberta. They own it. And obviously, Mr. Speaker, if the market is operated between a buyer and seller in a fair and reasonable way, then they will end up with fair market value. We're not rejecting market value, but people who were here long before me or the honourable member knew that the importance of that resource should also have built into